This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal. 200 BC, on the north coast of modern-day British Columbia. The waters lapped against the shoreline of an inland passage as the young fisherman pulled his canoe onto land. The sun was beginning to dim beyond the winding mountains towards the Pacific Ocean. He settled with his things, gathered wood, and prepared his fire. But as he went to strike his flint, he felt an ominous feeling wash over him. He knew he was being watched. His gaze rose slowly towards the tree line, meeting with a pair of dark eyes. The man froze, stunned with a feeling he did not understand. He quickly snapped out of his trance and made a break for his canoe. The creature then stepped into the remaining light, towering over 9 feet tall, and let out a bellowing scream. Nestled deep into the ancient red cedars and dense underbrush of the Great Bear Rainforest, dwell creatures whom the various First Nations peoples of British Columbia's north coast, among other locales, have known of for thousands of years to exist amongst them. The forest giants known as Sasquatch. This week on Into the Portal, we take a closer look at the ancient past of this creature. Some indigenous tales, historical accounts, and even locales where Sasquatch is said to dwell in modern times.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're back with part 2 of our strange Sasquatch encounters.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that we're doing this 2-week thing, and it's like I'm itching to get at it, and then it's like, oh wait, we have to wait another week, but here we are. We're back.
We have to wait another week.
Wow, we need the other week, let's be clear.
We did.
We really did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, stoked to be back. Before we get right into it, though, we have some shout-outs to make because we had some new members join our Patreon community in the last little bit, which has been amazing. So awesome. So big thanks, cool. And a shout-out to Alan T., actually from Calgary. So just right next door to us here in BC. Woo-hoo! Love that.
So, nice little rhyme there. Alan T. from Calgary.
Alan T. from Calgary. And then also Justin Smith, who joined us as an ancient explorer, a very prestigious tier indeed.
Ooh, 2 ancient explorers.
I know,
nice.
Really exciting. Also, shout out to Corey C., who joined us as a paranormal scholar, so he's getting our awesome mini-sodes. And then also Travis P. over in Arizona, who joined us under the ranks of Curious Creature. So super stoked on all of this. Thank you all so much for joining us. And shout outs to all y'all.
Really, really cool.
Yeah. Definitely pumped on that. And then we definitely wanted to just kind of run down through some of the points that were worth touching on again from part 1, because we definitely jumped around a lot in part 1.
Kind of, yeah.
And, like we started off, it's kind of funny, like this part 2 is almost what part 1, they're a little out of order in a sense, but we were so enthralled and fascinated with the violent attacks because we're kind of more familiar with Sasquatch already, being from BC and having talked about it a lot with people in the paranormal community and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we went that way to start it off. Like we were in Ohio, we were talking BC, Washington State with Ape Canyon, Florida swamp attacks, marked hominids on the East Coast in Michigan and Ontario. So today we're trying to kind of tie it together a little bit more and speculate on what these things are. Getting into more of that in part 3 too, into our theories and stuff, but we are focusing more on the North Pacific coast today, although we do some back and forth, but we're definitely we're tightening it up here for y'all for sure. So in terms of indigenous history, in episode 1, part 1, we touched briefly on kind of the Micmac East Coast. We went way back to the 1600s and some of their references to hairy giants in the forest.
Yep.
We talked about the Skookum Cast, which was an early 2000s piece of evidence that the Smithsonian outright refused to look at, and we talked about that a little bit too.
Ridiculous. Like, they had people volunteering to drive this cast clear across the country and no one on their end would look at it.
It's pretty absurd when you think about it, right? It's
It
the
just-
opposite of science.
Well, it just shows how politics and subjective opinions and people's staunchly held beliefs can trump what might be a great scientific discovery.
Yeah.
Which is really frustrating.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, actually, well, I mentioned this to you, but like I was reading an article the other day in preparation for this part 2, and it was from Smithsonian, and it literally started off, like, I didn't pull it up here quote word for word, but it was something along the lines of like we know that Sasquatch doesn't exist, but if it did, here's what it could have been or whatever. And it was like an article about Gigantopithecus.
Right. And they made the comment too that it might have at one point existed, but
Right.
not anymore.
And we know this, like we definitively know this, because whoever wrote that article bought a tent, went and spent a year in the middle of nowhere in northern British Columbia. Like, no.
Bought a tent? You need more than a tent.
Yeah. All I'm saying is have a little bit more of an open mind, people. You know what I mean?
All right, that's a nice little overview there. What are we getting into for part 2 today?
So what's in store for part 2 is a closer look at some indigenous origins of this creature.
Cool.
Some more evidence presented, including video footage, and we're talking about some giant skeletons that were discovered in one location. So all in all, this time around, we want to take a closer look at the indigenous history, the evidence that we can find from their stories, some artifacts that were really cool that we found too. And basically what's really important about this is how all of this provides a context for like pre-Euro historical foundation for the existence of Bigfoot Sasquatch. So before European contact, there was rich history of this creature, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to kind of bring in here. And then the reaffirmation of colonization, like Europeans coming over and seeing and experiencing this beast for themselves.
Right.
And that really obviously reaffirms its existence, right? And you found some interesting stuff from Lauren Coleman, who's been a great resource for us.
I thought this was really cool. I actually have a couple quotes here, and the one I'll start with is from Lauren Coleman's book called Bigfoot, A True Story of Apes in America, published in 2003. And at one point in the book, I can't remember, this was like chapter 2 or 3, he was talking about the breadth of belief amongst different indigenous peoples and regions and all this stuff. And so I thought this was really cool. He says here, quote, "In a survey of native traditions of Bigfoot that Mark A. Hall and I first published in 1970, we wrote," quote, this is like an inner quote within the quote, "a vast folklore and a belief in the race of very primitive people with revolting habits is found from Northern California up into the Arctic lands themselves. This tradition covers not only the whole stretch of the Pacific coast, but much of the rugged territory to the east, even into Greenland. Generally, these hominids are described as very tall, fully haired, and retired," which I'm not really sure what that means. "Sometimes they're described as carnivorous," and that was page 26, 27 of the book. There.
Interesting. Okay.
So he kind of speaks to the, like I said already, it's just like this wide range of this phenomena.
Definitely.
And then as well, I thought it was very telling too. There is clearly variations within these regional sort of interpretations of the phenomena. If this is the same, and it could be variations and different things happening in different places. But
Right.
This is cool. I got this from nativelanguages.org, and they go into exactly that, the variations, and something a little tinier. It's like Littlefoot versus Bigfoot.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it says here, quote, "Note that most of these legends, so Bigfoot legends, are told by tribes of the Pacific Northwest region, Northern California, Western Oregon and Washington State, British Columbia, Alaska, and the Yukon. There are also many stories involving wild hairy men of the forest in the plains and woodland tribes of the U.S., but most of these are forest dwarves, no taller than a human toddler."
Right.
And then it goes on to say, in some native stories, Bigfoot may have minor supernatural powers. The ability to turn invisible, for example. But they are always considered physical creatures of the forest. Not spirits, Orgos.
Right.
End quote. And so it's really cool, right? You get a lot of variation. I didn't really dive too deep into the whole Littlefoot thing, but I did see other references in other forums and stuff, people talking about this. And we do have a reference that we can include for that. But yeah, it's just really cool. You get so many stories, and a lot of these people will not openly talk about
Right,
this
of
stuff,
course.
so it's kind of hard to actually get firsthand accounts. But a lot of these will tell of individuals and even groups being chased, being attacked in the form of having boulders thrown at them while they're, say, paddling down a river in canoe. That was
Right.
one account. And then there was one elder who had told J.W. Burns, which we did mention in part 1, he was
Right.
that guy that really brought Sasquatch to the forefront of the pioneer and settler imagination in the 1920s.
Yes.
And he had this one account from an elder who basically said he had to shoot one and he wounded it, and
Yeah.
it saved his life, obviously, because he would have been like mauled, is kind of how he phrased it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just exactly that. So it's these are fringe creatures that have existed and have a rich history, like we already referred to in indigenous cultures.
Definitely.
And history.
And that is such a weird, like, juxtaposition in size, right? To look at, like, little feet, and evidence of that, potentially, and sightings of that, and are these offspring of what would be potentially Bigfoot, or is it a completely different subspecies of something?
Yeah.
Because then it's like, we get into,
The
like,
Orang Pendek?
so many layers, exactly, right? Because we get like questions within a question within a question, because we don't know what we're dealing with, and then we have marked hominids, necks are different sizes,
Yes.
other heights, varying colors in the fur, like
And on top of it, you get depictions of families. So clearly, mother, father, offspring. So youth. So
And single mate.
What do these look like when they're born? Like, are they just like a bigger than average human baby kind of thing?
like
And then-
hairless,
and that too.
like, or is it born with hair? Like,
Oh, that's a whole nother topic.
I mean,
of
there's the
conversation, but-
sexual side of Sasquatch, and there's a chapter, I believe, in Lauren Coleman's book, and there's been people who've done talks on this too, because it is a legitimate question. In like,
It
when,
is.
you know,
If it's actual creature, cryptozoological creature, not just like a paranormal phenomena.
right? Mm-hmm. We can come back to that, though.
Actually, we should get people's opinion. We should do a poll on Facebook. Who wants us to talk about the sexual side of sex?
Yeah, that's right. Hit us up.
I actually like that.
We can do
Three
Sasquatch
S's.
sex ed, and it'll be, you know,
With Conan O'Brien.
with Conan. That would be priceless.
Oh my god, who was he with in that segment? The guy that did Big Mouth. It's on Netflix.
Oh yeah,
right now.
Nick Kroll.
Nick Kroll.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
that would be good.
Let's get into some of this origins and evidence, though.
Sure. So we've dipped a little into the ancient past, and we wanted to pull up some evidence to kind of go with it too. We know that there's obviously like totem poles, masks that have been created representing Sasquatch, and all of these things are like just really unique pieces of an ancient history, right? So some of the more interesting ones, though, that we came across were stone carvings. They date between 1500 and 500 BCE, so pretty old. Not as old as, obviously, the indigenous populations in the area who have been dealing with Sasquatch for much longer,
Very
potentially.
true. That kind of places us at the end of the Bronze Age, kind of. Hey?
More or
at
less.
at the earliest
for
date of 1500
Exactly,
BC.
right. But these stone heads, there's been a number of them. Like, most of the time, they're depicting creatures we know exist, like rams, bear, things like this, right? But there have been some found in the Columbia River Valley, so this is the area close to us here in BC. There's a series of them depicting what seems to be some sort of an ape. And we'll put these images up because we really want to hear what you guys have to say. You know, definitively not a known North American animal, obviously, right?
No.
Definitely not a human either. And it's not the same as... This is kind of a weird, maybe, comparison, but it reminded me, looking at the image, of, like, the Olmec heads. Not because it looked like them, but it was kind of like, is there a reason why this looks different, potentially, from the people that are carving it? You know what I mean? And so the theories with the Olmec heads are that there was like West African kingdoms that, you know, traveled over in way ancient pre-Columbian past and were maybe seen as, you know, gods or something, right?
Right. That is pre-Columbian transoceanic contact.
Exactly.
Kind of idea.
So anyway, it reminded me of that because it's just really weird. And these things are about the size of a football, and they're on display in the Vancouver Natural History Museum. I think that's what it's called. Or they're on display in Vancouver. So
Oh, that's interesting. You know, that kind of makes or brings to mind, I guess, the well, Lost City of the Monkey God, the carvings of monkey heads that were found quite predominantly in there. Obviously, monkeys are endemic to that region. Makes you wonder if at some point, not at this timeline though, like 1500 to 500 BC, that there could have been possibly, we would have a fossil record of that.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm aware, there was no monkeys crawling around in North America, but
Nope.
maybe, please someone correct me.
No,
if I'm wrong.
there definitely wasn't.
Exactly, right? So that,
I mean, that
is
we
like,
know of, though, right? Like, that's that's the Gigantopithecus, like, what crossed over in the Bering Strait, and, like, what could have been here, and we'll get into all
well,
that.
exactly, too. But even just going back to my point about the monkey god, and obviously they had these animals right in their vicinity. So you, what is it? How does Hannibal Lecter phrase it? Is like, you begin to covet what you observe. Kind of, he has this line where he's like, what you're around, you begin to covet because it's around you all the time. You're exposed to it. But this is obviously, it's more of like a veneration or even just not a veneration. It could be just a simple representation of something that they've obviously encountered.
Well, that's actually,
my...
it's funny you bring that up because that's kind of what I'm moving into next year. Although I did want to mention too that like these heads did end up inspiring a lot of other artwork that was created over the next, century or so, like after they were first like unearthed or whatever, like rediscovered in like the 1800s. But there's been masks created for a long, long time, but there was this one guy that was known for this, in the area of Harrison, 1930s, and he recreated these masks depicting a really, really detailed Sasquatch face, and claimed that it was because of very real encounters. And the people in the area of Harrison Hot Springs, BC, it's one of the hotbeds of this, and they've been living amongst Sasquatch for a long, long time. So anyway, I thought that was kind of neat because it was just like inspired by the stone heads. But to come back to what you just said, like markers of where Sasquatch are, and because there's something to fear and know of, there are many, many petroglyphs, and we've mentioned petroglyphs before. We kind of like messed it up in an older episode in our description of it, right? But they're found all over BC, down in down through Washington, Oregon, into California, and these are carvings in stone, in some cases well over 10,000 years old, from North American indigenous populations.
Damn.
So literally like painting a comic book picture of an ancient past, right? Carving it out in the rock.
Cool.
So in Bella Coola, BC, this is on the north coast of British Columbia, there's these petroglyphs of Sasquatch heads that can be found drawn in the caves there and on rock walls. And this area is really known for Sasquatch encounters for like centuries and centuries.
Just the heads, hey?
Yeah, and there's other ones like it too. And these heads are really similar to other ape-like, the actual stone carved heads of ape-like beings.
Okay.
Found in the areas of the Columbia River Valley.
That's really interesting.
There's other ones in California and New Mexico, and these are super, super infamous, probably the most infamous on the West Coast. And they're picturing hairy creatures in what's known as the whistling face. And it basically looks like a rounded mouth, almost like a sock monkey kind of an appearance, because of the representation of the howls, like the shrieking howls that will be made.
Okay.
And so there's
booming color
exactly.
kind of thing.
So there's speculation that it makes a lot of sense. There's speculation, obviously, that these exist as markers for traveling in populations, right? Just to warn people that here's Sasquatch.
Same with even, like we sort of briefly mentioned last part, on part one, is the idea of like these skookum areas, like skookum regions, and how these would have been marked out by the people. So are you saying that these sorts of things would be found in as those sort of skookum markers as well?
Yeah, that's kind of what that's the idea anyway.
Okay, that's really cool. Obviously, these are found more so on rock walls and caves. I think I saw reference to maybe, I'm not, don't quote me on this, but I thought I saw reference to like, say, like markings on trees, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Too. Obviously stone's a little more permanent though.
Yeah,
it lasts a little longer.
Definitely, right? And then like pictographs is the one that obviously would last still a ridiculously long time, but not as long as a petroglyph.
Because
and that's
of
where
the fact that
it's died.
Died, right.
Yeah, exactly. So you use like, different natural ingredients, but there's a lot of famous ones too. All the way down into Central California, where the most famous ones are, and the indigenous peoples there, they're full drawings, and we've actually we posted one of these on our Instagram, I think it was, where it's not just a face, and they depict what's said to be 8.5 feet tall creatures.
Okay, well that's right on the marker.
So it's a foot shorter than what we've seen as the typical max 9 feet, a half a foot rather. But yeah, really unique, right?
Well, that's some pretty compelling evidence. I really like how this does really firmly establish a timeline that vastly precedes any sort of European encounters or inhabitants on the North American plain.
Yeah.
Continent, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I love it. And now let's get into an abduction story.
Yeah, we need a story.
Bigfoot abduction story.
That's right.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one we pulled up, and it's quite old. Well, not really, really old in the sense thousands of years old, but 1871.
Yeah.
So this is like the days of Susan Allison
That's
coming out
right.
to pioneer in the Okanagan
That's
Valley.
right.
Pretty cool. So this story or account is told by a young girl. Well, she was young at the time, correct?
Yes.
And this occurred in the 17th century, like we said. Actually, sorry, did I get that? No, 19th century. I'm confused. Sorry. So, yeah, she's a 19th century Chehalis girl.
That's right.
Her name was Seraphine Long, and she went missing from her village. And again, this is from near Harrison, BC, so we've referenced this already.
Really close to us.
Very close. Last spring, we were going to go to the Sasquatch anyways.
Yeah.
But anyways, Seraphine Long, yeah, she was kidnapped as an indigenous child, and she disappeared for about a year.
Yeah.
When she came back, she was far too weak to talk, and interestingly, that same night, she gave birth to a child, but that child did not survive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have an exact age for her, hey?
She was 16 when she went missing.
Oh,
I believe
okay.
in 17 when she returned.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Obviously of the age to be doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or be capable
To
doing it.
bear a child, indeed.
Yes, indeed. So this is really cool and kind of scary / creepy, but she said, when she regained herself and her composure a little bit, but she said that essentially she had been abducted by one of the, quote, hairy giants known to live in the nearby trees. So forest dweller. She said that the creature had spread tree gum on her eyes so that she couldn't see where it was taking her. And so this occurred twice, when she was actually abducted and then later on.
Yeah.
So she actually went on to state that she was very well kept and well fed by the Sasquatch and, again, his family. So
Yeah.
we get this other reference to a familial sort of circumstance.
Right.
And yeah, so she was housed in a cave. She doesn't know exactly where because of the tree gum.
Right.
But she thinks it's probably in the area of Mount Morris in BC.
Yes.
Yeah, again, she was actually interviewed much later, so this is decades and decades later in the 1940s, and she was quite elderly then. And she stated that she was quite glad her baby had passed away. Which, okay, so if she was abducted, spent about a year with these creatures, and then basically came home and gave birth on the spot, kind of thing, it's kind of implying that she was impregnated by a Sasquatch.
That's sort of what the story is implying, which is pretty bizarre, obviously.
Pretty traumatic. She didn't actually get into any detail of how or when or what actually happened in that regard. But pretty freaky. And it kind of parallels... it was the Yaren episode that we did. And that was a Patreon one, wasn't it?
Yes.
So our general audience would be as familiar. But Yaren, the hairy man of China, is kind of the wild man of China.
Right.
There was the instance where essentially there was a wild woman that was basically a Yaren captured and kept as a kind of a prisoner. Not a prisoner, but she was kept as a worker because she was almost just considered just an inferior human.
Yeah.
And she was impregnated several times too and born several
Allegedly,
hybrid.
right? As the legends go.
Yeah, exactly. Again, this was quite... was that early 1900s?
That's
can't remember
early,
exactly.
and there were stories of that in Russia too.
Yes.
And there were stories about Stalin trying to
kind of a
rumors of him
classic
breeding apes and
The
and they were
Superman.
trying to create a super soldier out of apes. And,
Yeah. Planet of the Apes.
yeah.
But again, right, so that's not the only reference we've gotten to this type of thing. It's kind of just setting a precedent there.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what do you make of that story?
I mean, well, first and foremost, obviously, fans of Astonishing Legends will probably be reminded of the case of Albert Ostman, which is another famous Sasquatch kidnapping case.
Yep.
And they're not the only two stories. In fact, Sasquatch kidnapping and Bigfoot kidnapping stories are prevalent. And we could do an entire podcast just on those, right? On violent Sasquatch attacks, kidnappings. It's a very weird sociological question when it comes to Sasquatch, you know, because especially with Seraphine Long, because she was returned. The story was, I think, like basically she was engaged to be married before she disappeared, so that there was a possibility that her being pregnant was from that, although it only takes 9 months. So was it actually 12 months she was gone? We don't really know. But maybe she's not actually implying that she was impregnated by a Sasquatch. But the whole idea of Sasquatch is taking people. Why? Is it from pure curiosity? Is it from... I mean, clearly they're not planning on, like, killing and eating. It's not like a hunting thing, right?
No, it's almost like an induction or like a... We could use some extra help around here. You want to go and get some guys? Let's go round up a few of your cousins there.
I guess. Or is it's just like a weird thing that's like not even thinking. It's just like, oh, hey, I'm just going to grab it and go. And then, you know.
Well, if you want to be uber super skeptical, you could even just frame it as like a very weird anthropocentric like delineation on the whole matter, where if you're going to take the stance that this is actually all made up and these people are just spouting tales, including Osman, then it's, again, right, it's just a very obvious human construction that is centered on an exciting thing that we would find exciting, right?
Yeah.
But I'm not discounting it by any means. I think that this is certainly plausible because, again, right, just because of the other references that we've come across.
Well, and the people in her community believed her. You know what I mean? She wasn't shunned.
Oh, yeah. And, okay, and another thing, too, just to go back to the whole, like, pregnancy thing, and the fact that she said she was glad that the child hadn't survived.
Yeah.
You would think you would want your child to survive if you knew it had been born by... The implication is there that something sexual happened.
Right.
But anyways, we're not a rape podcast or
yeah.
that kind of podcast.
Cryptozoology rate podcast. Yeah, that's Wonder what the audience would be for that one. Not really sure. Don't want to know.
No, actually, that's...
You know what we never really did though, Amber, was give like a really specific definition for Sasquatch. So like picture Seraphine Long getting scooped up and taken away. It's essentially by a
giant hairy hominid known for its elusive nature. Unless it's kidnapping you. And its prominence in Pacific Coast indigenous folklore. So, yeah, just reiteration here. Like, there is quite a range of the footage.
The footage, the tonnage.
The tonnage. Ranging, like, literally could be the size of a tall human being. So 6.5 feet all the way up to 14, which is redonkulous, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's not common.
No, but... Yeah, wouldn't want to come across that one.
No doubt.
And these are massive, so they're weighing between 400 and 1,000 pounds. That's big.
So you're not really going to be able to break free from that abduction.
No, even like Ostman, right? Because people obviously were skeptical of his account. There's a few details that don't really line up as far as maybe distance traveled, where he ended up, all that kind of thing. But, oh my gosh, where were they going with that? Just like the size, right? So like, but the fact is, like, even if he was a frontiersman, he could take care of himself, but these are up to 1,000 pound animals, or creatures. I don't even want to really call it an animal, like, even though I'm discounting animals. I love animals, so
well, I mean, you said the other day,
animals.
but you said exactly that's what you said the other day, right?
Yeah.
The idea of trying to even delineate there, like, and it does matter when it comes down to the evidence, and we're gonna again get to that in part 3. But anyway, definitely a weird interaction with Seraphine Long.
So cool.
We're kind of going back in time here now because we have some
cool, fascinating. Astonishing.
We already covered some really old settler accounts in part 1. Like, we were in the 1800s.
Yes.
We found some other ones though, and we just wanted to like reaffirm, to back up these indigenous legends and tradition. And these are all coming from like real figures in history, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just like, a sighting from Joe Blow who lived in something.
Or a group of random frontiersmen in the Okefenokee.
Exactly.
Remember that guy? He's like, it's just like okie dokie. Okefenokee.
Okefenokee.
Yeah, there you go.
That's not bad. It's easy.
Yeah, it's
Why
pretty
are we
good.
struggling so much with that?
I don't know.
Well, we came across a story by the name of a guy named David Thompson. It's not really much of a story, but he does make a report in his journal, an official journal that he kept because he was working as a surveyor and a fur trader for the Northwest Trading Company. So January 7th, 1811, he made an attempt to cross the Rocky Mountains near present-day Jasper, Alberta. And this is a place where many Sasquatch sightings happen each year, and we've been there. We stayed at Emerald Lake, which is really close to Jasper, last winter.
Yeah, we did.
And we went squatching. We didn't see anything.
No.
But while we were there, we were looking around and being like, I mean,
This is the place to be.
you're not going to run into a human being anywhere here,
No.
really, unless you're right at the resort that we were at, which was in the middle of nowhere, basically, right?
Essentially, yeah.
But this is the note he made in his journal. So January 7th, quote, I saw the track of a large animal. Has 4 large toes, about 3 or 4 in long and small nail at the end of each. So he's abbreviating his notes. The ball of his foot sank about 3 inches deeper than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well. The hole is about 14 inches long, 8 inches wide, and very much resembles a large black bear's track, but it wasn't a large black bear's track. This was in the rivulet, about 6 inches of snow. I don't actually know what that word means. Anyway.
In the rivulet. Like a rivulet, I believe, is like a miniature stream or river that can run alongside a stream.
Gotcha.
Don't quote me on that, though.
Okay. Either way, clearly something that's not a bear track, because bear tracks aren't 14 inches long, unless it's on a hill, which he's not describing. We talked about that in part 1 too, which can elongate a track and make it look different than what it
That's
actually
true.
is. But 14 inches long, 18 inches wide, that's friggin' massive, obviously.
It's pretty impressive. And that's really, really on par with a lot of the footprints that we've talked about.
Exactly.
already.
And we posted a picture on Instagram the other day too of the various casts, plaster casts. All different sizes, but obviously whatever we're dealing with here is.
And just FYI for everyone out there, a rivulet is a very, very small stream.
There you go. Hey, Amber.
Yeah.
You need to go on Jeopardy when they've got lots of small stream questions.
Jeopardy. We should do paranormal Jeopardy. Oh, that's amazing.
That's actually a good idea. We should do that on the show.
We should. That'd be amazing. Oh, anyone
be
who
fun.
wants to
Bring
play,
people
just
on.
get at us.
Shoot anybody, and if you want to come up with questions,
Contestants. Oh
come
my
up with
gosh.
them. Oh, I like this.
I love it
We
too.
got something good cooking here. We jump ahead a little bit now to another one that's really strange, because we're not actually sure where it's being referenced. It's in Washington, but we don't know if this guy's talking Mount Rainier or Mount St. Helens, that we know is where Abe Canyon. So 1840, Reverend Elkanah Walker, so a pioneer American missionary living in the area of Washington State, and wrote stories passed down to him by the indigenous peoples in the area of Spokane, Washington, about a race of giants, of hairy giants living in the woods.
Giant Harrys.
Giant Harrys, baby. Oh, yeah. Possibly living in the area of Mount Rainier, Washington. And these forest giants, this is, again, similar to the Yeren and the Orang Pendek, and just kind of strange. These forest giants would sneak into the village at night and steal fish the villagers had caught that day.
Sneaky.
Then, later, they would throw stones at houses. When the tribe's fishermen woke early in the morning, they would find massive tracks about 1.5 feet long.
Okay.
So they weren't able
That's
to
much-
really like catch these things. Does that tie into the being able to vanish and disappear or be invisible when you want to? Similar to Abe Canyon, like doesn't clearly want them there, but also
Yeah.
maybe kind of needs them there because it just is going in to steal fish.
It's scavenging.
Strange, right?
It's an opportunist.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of that so far too. That's really interesting. The throwing stones at houses. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's and the whole again, we get another consistency with the footprints, even though if it's okay, so a foot's obviously 12 inches, so add on another 6, so we're talking about 18 inches. Probably like I'd round that down to like 16 inches. So that's still in the range, right?
It's in the range. He had a quote here from his journal, specifically referencing his conversation. So, like, it says, "They believe in a race of giants which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. This mountain is covered with perpetual snow. So they, the creatures, inhabit the snowy peaks. They hunt and do all their work at night. They are men stealers." Huh. "They come to people's lodges at night when the people are asleep and take them and put them under their skins and to a place of abode without even walking."
Waking.
rather. Sorry. So that's very much like Albert Ostman, slung over his shoulder in a nap in his sleeping bag, right? Mm-hmm. Their track is 1.5 feet long. They steal salmon from Indian nets and eat
them raw.
Eat them raw, as bears do. If the people are awake, they always know when they are coming. Very nearby, their strong smell that is most intolerable. It is not uncommon for them to come in the night and give 3 whistles, and then the stones will begin to hit their houses.
Okay.
So
That
whistles
is
or
really
howls,
interesting.
so we've got descriptions of communication. We've got some weird sociological things in terms of it's like they're banding together and they're throwing rocks at houses. Why? I don't know. Why?
And then we are with the whole kidnapping again, right?
Yeah.
Coming into people's lodges.
They are men stealers. That's
Men
an
stealers,
ominous description.
The idea that they hunt and do all their work at night too. Again, yeah, obviously these are nocturnal animals. It just reminded me of the Menahune.
I knew you were going to say that. And isn't this just funny? Again, we just keep getting these references to completely unrelated, like mythological stories, paranormal accounts in
A lot of
in this
parallels.
world, right?
Yeah.
Grand unifying theory, people.
That's
I don't
so
know.
cool. So yeah, the men stealers, the idea that their habitat is snow-peaked, so they live on a mountain of perpetual snow. I love that. It's kind of like bringing into mind like imagery of like abominable snowmen type things
Yeah.
and how that could be tied, right? Like the those things in Siberia. Maybe we're dealing with something similar here.
Possibly.
And again, like, okay, wait, I'm thinking now, like, is Mount Rainier a perpetually covered peak then?
I don't think so. And you know where we had the Mount Rainier reference? Do you recall? I'm throwing it out there. Do you remember?
I can't remember now.
With from our Maury Island incident episode. Remember the sighting at Mount Rainier, Washington?
Yes.
Kenneth Arnold.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Aw,
that just popped into my head.
That's so neat.
But it's obviously a super high mountain. Perpetually snow-capped, though? I don't know. Maybe in 1840?
Mount St. Helens definitely would. Or would have been back then.
It would have
before
been.
It blew up. I wonder if it still is. I don't even know.
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't have been when it erupted. But 1840, I guess.
Oh man, that whole idea of like coming in at night, throwing stones at the houses, the whistling, the howling, like that seems like a lot similar to the Ape Canyon incident.
Yes.
And you know, it's kind of interesting now, we're going to jump ahead another 6 years roughly, where we have yet another incident, much like Ape Canyon, much like this one we just cited.
Yes.
But first, we're going to take a quick break from Coffee Gator, so let's roll that clip. Have you ever wondered what keeps Sasquatch squatching all night? He really does seem to have endless energy for his nighttime activities, throwing boulders, tree knocking, attacking cabins and such.
Must be a double dose of coffee. Conveniently hot and ready to go in his stainless steel, copper-lined thermal travel cup. Coffee Gator has many awesome designs and colors, all with the highest technology to keep your coffee safe and hot.
Coffee Gator really does have everything you need to drink better coffee. I'd say they're probably one of the most innovative coffee companies in the business. Even their canisters have extra design features to keep coffee as fresh as possible, including a built-in CO2 valve that eliminates harmful attacking CO2 while keeping your coffee ultra fresh, as well as protection from light, moisture, and oxygen, all factors that compromise the bean's quality before it's even brewed.
And as a listener of the show, you can have the same awesome coffee experience as Sasquatch with 15% off your purchase using promo code QUARK, spelled Q-U-A-R-K. Visit coffeegator.com today and explore all the amazing options they have to get you drinking better coffee. That's promo code QUARK, spelled Q-U-A-R-K.
And we're back. All right, so this incident that we are going to talk about next is, like I already referred to, it's very similar to the Ape Canyon attack of 1924. Except this one comes much earlier. It's 1846. So one of the earliest written accounts. And actually, you know what's funny though? The Okefenokee one is earlier than that too. Obviously, that was in the 1820s, I believe.
That's right.
But this guy, Alexander Caulfield Anderson, wrote in 1846 of his account during his exploration of the Harrison Lake area of BC, Canada. Anderson is said to have seen several, quote, wild giants during his time in the area. And in one alleged account from him, he and his party had to retreat from the area because stones were being thrown at them from a nearby hillside.
That's right.
It's not rolled at them, they're being thrown at them.
Yeah.
And Sasquatch researchers say that Anderson and his men... Sorry. Anderson and his men were stoned.
Let's go to the stoning. Like,
just a good family
Yeah.
stoning.
yeah, that sounds like they have them like lined up. Like all I did was say Jehovah.
Stoned. That's so good. And then on the flip side, I'm picturing them just like hippy dippy trippy, just like woo.
Yeah.
Just dazed
just
and
baked.
confused. Like,
Oh man.
oh man. But anyways, yeah, so they were essentially stoned, not to death, but stoned, by a family of Sasquatch who seemingly entrenched themselves behind rocks on a mountainside. So that's kind of cool. They set up fortifications, and they're like, this is strategic, man. Anyway, well, in my mind, I'd be thinking that. I don't know what Sasquatch think. But anyways, some Sasquatch historians even mention Anderson's letters to the Board of Management as references. But unfortunately, no one has actually found his report in the Hudson's Bay Company archives.
Yeah, which is sad. It kind of makes you wonder if someone yanked it out of there, or like because it was embarrassing.
Oh, maybe,
like
yeah.
at an earlier date.
That's
But it's tough to say.
It is tough to say, and you know what's funny? This is the second time today that I've been not impressed with Hudson's Bay Company.
Oh, I know.
When we were shopping, that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was closeout sale, 10%.
Closeout sale doesn't even cover tax.
No.
Like,
and I'm pretty
great.
sure they jacked up the prices before they put the sale price on. Anyways, it's
If only we
frustrating.
had some furs to trade, maybe we could get something on a discount. I don't know. Yeah, I mean that's very similar to Ape Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we've got these like throwing stones, and just to again like be clear here, throwing stones for Sasquatch means like they're the size of basketballs and footballs.
Yeah, so like the
being
size of your
thrown
head.
hundreds of meters in some cases, literally.
That's fatal if that hit you.
Oh God,
before.
yeah, absolutely,
That's like almost reminds me of the Mesoamerican ball game.
definitely,
Deadly.
definitely.
That was so funny when we watched Emperor's New Groove and they had like, or no, it wasn't Emperor's New Groove. It was the Road to El Dorado when they had the ball game in there.
Yeah, but it was like just like basketball
Oh, it was
in
so
that
dumb.
version. It was like so like wimpy.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Anyway, that's stupid.
Yeah. So, okay, we've gone through a lot here, and we're kind of coming closer and closer and closer up to like modern times, to, like where we stand now, right? And on the North Pacific coast, including, I don't know if this actually includes BC, but definitely on the North Pacific coast, like Washington, Oregon, and Northern California, there's around 550 annual reported sightings of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, in these areas per year. And that's just what's actually reported. So
Okay.
think about all the people that end up actually
Don't.
seeing these things, you know, and
they
don't
just-
report them. And obviously all the whatever potential sightings in passing where people don't even think they've seen that. It's a black bear, it's this, it's that, it's whatever, right?
They'll discount it themselves just because they'll think, oh, I must be crazy.
Right. The last time, in part one, we talked about the coining of the term Sasquatch in the 1920s. But now we've gone a little further with these indigenous stories and all that. So, but it wasn't really until the 1960s that this all really kind of hit the scene, right?
Like Bigfoot.
Bigfoot, 1950s,
Like the pop
1960s.
culture Bigfoot, you mean?
Exactly. And this is where I actually made a mistake in part one. I was getting confused because in 1958, that's when the term Bigfoot was really thrust into the public consciousness, right? After the incident at Bluff Creek, California. So this is the same area where Patterson Gimlin, I'm forgetting their first names.
Right.
Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin had their experience, right?
Yep.
So I got those dates a little bit mixed up.
Oh, wow.
But so
We're known to do that once in a while.
1958, this crew discovered tracks of just massive proportion, right? And these are some of the most famous casts and images in all of Bigfoot lore and research. And one such print was photographed with Jerry Crew. He was the main guy running this construction site.
Okay.
So again, infamous image of a giant print stretching the entire length of his torso. And at some point, the crew didn't even want to actually return to the site. They were afraid of what was in the area. They believed that they were being watched. Although there's more to this story as a potential hoax, and there's some people who think it is definitively a hoax at this point in time. But regardless, we're not getting into Bluff Creek too much in this incident. But regardless of whether it was a hoax or not, this is what thrust Bigfoot into the public consciousness. It was the 1950s.
That's very interesting. Yeah. A giant... Okay, that's so insane. It crosses his entire torso.
Yeah.
That's massive.
So he's holding it up, yeah, and it's like, so that would be, I mean, it's it's a solid 20 inches plus, like it's massive, just absolutely enormous. It's crazy, right?
So Bluff Creek, California.
That's right.
Huh.
So that's
Interesting.
kind of like, yeah,
It makes you wonder what else the crew experienced to make them not want, like if it was literally just that physical trace evidence or if there were other things. Because it does bring to mind, even this again isn't exactly in that same neck of the woods, but still West Coast, when we brought up the missing hiker from the Ape
Yes.
Canyon area in the
Yeah.
1950s.
Right.
And how the mountain search and rescue people, can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he essentially made the comment. He's like, the entire time we were there, we felt like we were being watched entirely. Like, it was just, yeah, it was creepy
Yeah.
AF. And yeah, they experienced it the whole time. And then he also referenced another time he was in the region and he felt the same way. So yeah, I think that people, it's easy for people to say that you're gonna feel creeped out because you're looking for a hiker, someone missing, and you
Right.
can't really explain the circumstances as to why they would have gone missing. It's like, what was there, like a friggin' unknown mine shaft they just fell into? The fact that they saw this evidence of him clearly scrambling away in haste was just,
Right.
that would maybe set the tone. But, I still think that people like that like search and rescue people, like
They're out there all the time.
emergency responders have a very solid not stamina, sorry, a
Demeanor.
psychological demeanor
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. So they wouldn't really want to feed into, say, irrationalisms, if you want
No.
to call them that.
No.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So Bigfoot, Sasquatch, they're hitting the big stage, and this was happening everywhere. 1950s British Columbia, we get a reiteration of a British Daily Colonist article, kind of resurfaced, and this originally was published in the 1884.
Mm-hmm.
I love this because it's so, it's just so classic.
It's ridiculous.
It is. And it talks about a small, hairy, Sasquatch-like infant creature that was captured near Yale, BC, and nicknamed Jacko by the press.
That's right.
And the archives of the University of British Columbia actually had this article and quote unquote revealed it to be very real. So it was really published, but it doesn't mean that it was actually true.
No.
But in this article, it claimed that the RCMP, so the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, had held the creature in a jail cell until they could decide what to do. And in the meantime, like, people were paying admission fees. The article went off about, like, how they wanted to see this little Jacko creature. And it was widely seen. However, on further investigation, the RCMP denies this incident ever occurring, and there is no
course.
record of such.
No.
And those who are long-toothed in the community, so they were around or either had family in the area at the time, were just like scoffed at. It was outrageous. They denied it completely. They said, we're not even sure how something like this could have been published unless it was literally like April 1st or something, you know what I mean? It's just it's just an April Fool's joke. So in the end, the legend of Jacko definitely went down in history as a British Columbian Bigfoot hoax. But it's a very classic example of, say, yellow journalism at best,
Yeah.
I guess
definitely.
I would say.
But
And it's actually interesting because it provides, even if it is totally freaking fake, the idea of, like, again, like these childlike wildmen / Bigfoot, sorry.
Right.
And yeah, and it definitely speaks to obviously the Canadian consciousness and public awareness of this creature, this phenomena, however you want to refer to it as.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of funny when I was reading through Lauren Coleman's book, the same book I referenced at the top of the episode, Bigfoot, The True Story of Apes in America. He makes comment about the Jacko case and uses it as an example to kind of highlight the lack of critical thinking and thorough research amongst Bigfoot researchers. And it's kind of funny because a lot, I can't remember who he referenced right off the top of my head, but it was like the Ivan T. Sandersons of the world, like, the people that were like preeminent scholars of paranormal phenomena.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people actually falsely included or published this story in their books, in their articles, used it as irrefutable evidence of the proof of Bigfoot's existence. And so for me, I thought it was kind of funny that Lauren Coleman, he really took issue with that, and definitely, he put that one to bed.
Put it to bed.
Put it to bed.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of where are we at here? I feel like
Well, we got
there's
some
so
more
much
stories.
content, you know what I mean, right?
You did mention the Patterson Gimlin story. I think we should get into that a little bit.
Sure. So, I mean, it was nearly 10 years after the Bluff Creek incident when the best evidence yet, arguably, kind of surfaced. Mm-hmm. So Roger Patterson, accompanied by Bob Gimlin, went in search of Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, California, 1967. So right in the same area, obviously, of the original 1958 Jerry Crew photograph and the original Bigfoot cast taken there. Of course, they get this infamous footage, the Patterson film.
The Patterson Gimlin film.
And everyone listening to our show is familiar with this, right? Like,
They
you
must
guys
be.
know this, I think. Most
And
people would be, right?
Must be somewhat familiar with Roger Patterson and hopefully Bob Gilman. Like, Bob is still with us, correct?
He is, yes.
And he was actually, I just read this recently, he was one of the first Native American, what was it? He's like a Native American guide that decided to kind of pursue Bigfoot through like the official research organization or whatever. And then Roger Patterson, I don't know as much about him personally, but then we did reference him in the first bit of our series when we were talking about Ape Canyon and how heavily influenced Roger was when he talked to Fred Beck, who had been part of that Ape Canyon incident and later wrote about it and published that pamphlet in the 1960s.
Right.
So that was kind of my, that's my familiarity with him. Like, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that's
or?
kind of the most significant thing that I think people end up obviously using to discredit Patterson. But Gimlin just kind of falls by the wayside, right? Like he didn't want to be in the limelight when it happened, I don't think, as much as maybe Patterson did, or maybe he didn't, right? And that's the question, and that's why it's purported to be a potential hoax, that he was super interested in Bigfoot, right? Like, he was a Bigfoot researcher. He was potentially looking for the creature.
So he was kind of like a Raider Ron in that sense, where he had his premises, he wanted to find a specific conclusion. Maybe. Or maybe, but that's just it, to disprove or prove the existence. Like, that to me isn't having too much of an agenda.
Just because you have an interest and you research something doesn't mean you hoax the evidence that you are obviously trying to get in your quest, right? It's kind of a weird sort of, but people do use it against them, right? The fact that he was trying to, get on the scene, basically, get on the Bigfoot scene.
So what did they actually get footage of?
Well,
how would you describe it?
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, y'all have seen it. But it's essentially, he stumbles to capture the image of what is essentially what appears to be a over the hump of middle age female Sasquatch, Bigfoot, that is clearly was getting a drink by the river or something like that, creek. And Bob Gimlin infamously keeps calling it a crick every interview. We were walking out the crick. And that's like, it's sort of weird.
The crick.
But, and it sort of walks away from him. Patterson stumbles over a log or something, and he's on his knees, stabilizes himself, and he ends up capturing a pretty good image of it, walking away, and it takes a look over its right shoulder.
It's about, oh my gosh, it's between 12 and 15 seconds worth of footage of the actual creature itself. And it is kind of shaky, but it is very, I would say it's actually quite clear. And we've seen other versions of it where it's essentially been stabilized, so you can kind of follow the trajectory and the walking pattern of the creature that's being depicted. You said female, right? Because you get these large pendulous breasts that are very clearly seen protruding from the side of the creature. Very heavy in the hips, eh? Like a very, very matronly looking Sasquatch is kind of how I would phrase it. And it's got what they described as like a ridge on the craniums on the top of the head.
Yes.
And as it's walking away from the men, okay, so basically what happened, the gist that I get of this story, like the backstory, is that they were in the woods hiking around this area on horseback. Both of them were on horseback. They come over this ridge or like come around a bend kind of thing and see this creature spotted at Bluff Creek, essentially.
Yes.
Patterson jumps off of his horse to capture footage while Gimlin stayed on his horse. And allegedly, he says himself, he had his gun trained on this creature the entire time. He was ready to shoot if it actually turned on them, but it didn't.
No intention of doing that, really, obviously. Like,
No,
they're not
only
out
if
there
they were threatened.
Right.
And that's kind of how he phrased it in Lauren Coleman's book, at least.
Yeah. Well, he did say that in later interviews.
Exactly,
as well.
exactly. And so after they actually get this, like, 12 to 15 seconds of footage, they actually pursued it for a few miles, right? That's kind of the gist I got.
They tracked it for a few miles, could never catch up to it. Which brings
On horseback?
On horseback. I mean, we've never been to Bluff Creek. We don't know the exact terrain other than like the general description, right? So anyway, it's they tracked it for a few miles, but were unable to do it. It brings up the questions of whether or not it brings up the questions of interdimensionality, really, to me, with Sasquatch, right? And the spirit aspect of this creature, because they were both, I mean, Gimlin was a trained tracker, and they knew what they were doing in that area. You'd think they should have been able to track a creature that, at the time, Gimlin estimated to be 350 pounds, and then when they were looking at the footprints and the impressions, it was, no, it's more like 800 pounds.
So then my next question is, if that's the case, and they were tracking this, but they were not able to catch up with it, I'm not going interdimensional. I'm going with this thing's smart, because it actually did glance over its shoulder at them. You see that in the footage. And then, so obviously it's aware of them, correct? And so my question is, maybe this thing's a lot smarter than they are, and it could have potentially backtracked, covered up its trail to some degree, maybe it had a hiding spot, like a hole or a pit, like, you know? And obviously we are talking about professional trackers. I'm not going to discount their skills.
Right.
But I'm just saying, right, if these things have been able to remain in the fringes just as they have, then you would think they'd have some means and some
absolutely.
methods.
And there's obviously even people who, like, I'm just thinking about myself trying to walk through the woods, and like I'm no ninja and no tracker, and I'm not very good at hiding either. So I'm probably the worst. And my ankles crack when I go upstairs, so I like couldn't be an assassin.
You're hopeless.
Like, at all. I'm completely hopeless. But literally for an 800-pound, 8-foot tall a creature the size of a moose to go into the trees away from two trackers and not a single leaf out of place, broken twig, footprint, nothing. After that, basically, that I'm aware of, like we didn't
after that first few miles,
after that first little bit, and they just lost it completely. That's really crazy, right? Like that implies such a high level of intelligence to evade humanity. Like they're smarter than us.
Yep.
Right.
I'm definitely of the mind that they are a lot more in tune with their surroundings, a lot more environmentally aware, and thus have gained a sense about their place in the world and a sense of their place in this environment that far exceeds our capabilities in these areas, right?
Do you think it's possible that they could have even just walked right past it?
Yep.
Like it walked into the woods away from them and then literally just like went into some sort of a stoic position leaning against a tree or some crazy thing.
Because they say that about the orang pendek too, right?
They do.
Literally, if it freezes, it's just gone. You can't see it. It just blends right in. And
oh man, there's something very ominous to that too,
freaky,
right? Like
man.
You're tracking something and you're walking, man, that's like prime for a movie scene.
I'll bring up another quick example here that I actually wasn't going to include in this part 2, but I think is actually kind of relevant to this particular conversation. In the 1950s, there was, sorry, not 1950s, I believe it was 1970s. Don't quote me on that though. And I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it was a psychologist. And he gained widespread media attention for his encounter with Bigfoot, where essentially what happened was he was hiking, doing a day walk with his family through the woods. He goes for a bathroom break, so he's squatting in the woods. He literally said, like, he kept his family in eye line at all times so he could watch them, because they were pretty far out there. And then next thing you know, he felt or saw something out of the corner of his eye. He looked, he saw a massive creature. And it literally just went from behind one tree to the next and disappeared, like behind the tree. But he saw that it was watching his family just like he was. And so he flipped. And he just like, I don't even know if he finished his job.
He finished his job. It's like you're talking to our dog.
I know.
Now.
I'm just trying to keep it sanitary.
The guy was taking a dump, Amber. All right,
he was taking a dump, but anyways, I don't know.
There's something just so paranormal about that to me. That such a massive creature that's like Predator. Right? Like that's like you're going through you have this crazy shimmering camouflage and you can literally just go from Yeah, hide behind a toothpick if you want to.
Exactly. That's
Like-
kind of how he described it. And it was kind of unfortunate, too. Like, we can talk about this case again when we get into the larger meta themes of Bigfoot and how it's evolved over the centuries and decades and all this kind of stuff into modern times. But he got a lot of attention, and he was... media outlets poised him as being very credible, right?
Yeah.
He's a psychologist. He works in an office all day. And then it was just frustrating because on Lauren Coleman's part, when he mentioned that case, he was like, oh yeah, so we're just going to discount hunters, trackers, outdoorsmen, farmers, people that are interacting with the natural environment on a day-to-day basis. Media just discounts all of that, but
Because
they'll
the guy
latch
knows.
onto a psychologist.
Yeah.
Because he's got a PhD, man.
Credentials, that's all. Even though it's ironically like just a severe lack of credentials, right? Is what you just said.
It is.
But
yeah.
and this caught the attention of people north of the border too, and shortly after in November, because this happened in the fall.
You're talking about Patterson Gimlin.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Sorry, going back to Gimlin and Patterson. This whole kickoff of the Bigfoot craze, and they hopped up north because obviously BC being prime Sasquatch research territory at University of British Columbia, and they were actually interviewed by a CBC reporter and had their footage analyzed at UBC in Vancouver.
Oh no way! That's so
In that same year. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting Canadian connection, and you can get the full. Word for word of that interview on CBC. We have the link. We'll have it on our website. I added this in kind of last minute because I just found it really interesting, and we've seen this guy before. In 2009, the footage was reanalyzed, and it's been reanalyzed a million times.
Oh, yeah,
and
I remember
this was interesting because there's this guy named Esteban Sarmiento. Sarmiento. Yeah. Is that right?
Yep.
Close enough. We're so sensitive about pronunciation now because people have been like, you guys suck at pronouncing things. And we're like, pronouncing things? I'm like, yeah, I know. We know. We really, really know. Sorry,
Let's
guys.
just not get stuck on it.
But he's an anthropologist, ape specialist, hominologist, works for, right now, the Natural History Museum in New York, but he's been a professor and things like that in the past, and brought on Monster Quest and various other documentary series looking at cryptozoological cases and stuff. And he looked at the film, and basically what they did is they brought in a couple of different athletes, as they called them. I think they were volleyball players, judging by my estimation. They didn't actually say. But they were quite tall, slender, and basically they tried to, because they figured that height-wise that would match, and they tried to recreate the walk in the film. Because there's this very strange hitch motion in the knee during the step that... To some people, they would say that that's like a person trying to like pull up a costume with each step, like keep it up, right? Like you're trying to lift it with each step, trying to walk in a heavy suit, basically. But it still doesn't make it doesn't make sense.
It's not a natural human walking motion.
It's not a natural human walking motion. So they went through a bunch of different video angles of this and these multiple different people trying to recreate this. And essentially what Sarmiento came up with was that, like this is clearly not the walk of an ape and definitely not the walk of a human.
And even just on top of that, like, the walk is huge. That's really important. But the other aspects of the subject of the film, if you want to call it that, the idea that there are no visible seams, there is no visible, there's no bunching of anything anywhere, like, that you could probably pick out if it was a costume. This thing would literally have to be, like, the highest grade, top-notch, custom-fitted movie suit, like movie grade.
Planet of the Apes
suit.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can think off the top of my head that would closely match that is what we saw in, was it 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Oh, yeah.
But even those were very clearly men. Like, you could just tell.
Well, of course. And, there's people that go way further into this than we planned on in this. We have a bunch more cool stuff we want to get to. But, there's a few names that people, I think it might even be in Coleman's book. But anyway, there was a few costume makers at the time that worked on Planet of the Apes, that worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And they totally said nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. And on top of it, that's the best costume I've ever seen, if it's a costume.
I feel like later on there was someone that came out and said they made it but couldn't prove it. And
was
then there's
a
a lot
hoax,
of people that have come out and said they were wearing it but couldn't prove it either.
Exactly.
They'd say, oh, that was me, but then they had no idea where Bluff Creek even was, how to even get there.
So they don't have the details.
It's like, well, I hope you had a ride home that day, because it would have taken you a while then. You know what I mean? Anyway. Yeah,
that's
a
really
good point,
interesting, though. I like that. Because I think there's a lot to it. you have to have a really weird complex if you're going to go out and fake. Like, I guess if you're trying to fake an entire career, that makes sense. But, like, say if you're the person that literally was just dressing up in the suit, like, what are you getting out of that? Like, I don't even know.
A paycheck, I'd guess, from the person. Say, hey,
from Patterson, like
it just on a straight like I feel like I'm a good judge of character. Like they just don't seem the type in the interviews, especially Gimlin, unless he was duped too.
Oh yeah,
because then that's the perfect fall, right? Look at this perfectly innocent man who is a tracker and who kind of like did the classic like Homer gif, like going into the bushes, like after this all started to blow up.
Exactly. Yeah.
That kind of makes sense, but then that's like me jumping ahead and jumping ahead and jumping ahead. You know what I mean? It's like that's just my like. You can't prove it, and it doesn't seem likely. Really good evidence, though. Still remains to this day. Hotly debated. Let us know what you guys think about the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Yeah, give us your take.
And actually, I think Astonishing Legends might be talking to Gimlin. I thought I saw that on Twitter. They might have a chance to speak with him in California somewhere.
Yeah,
so that'd
Scott
be really cool.
Looking
forward to seeing what those guys come up with. We wanted to talk about a really modern day, some locales where Sasquatches dwell. Where you guys can actually go today and basically be guaranteed to have a Sasquatch experience.
What? Where's our tickets? When can we go?
That's just it. I was just going to say, we haven't gone yet to these places, and we live very, very close to them. This particular locale we're not that close to. It's on the north coast of BC, and the location of the ancient peoples of the Kitasoo First Nations. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How else would you pronounce that? Kitasoo.
Yeah.
It's gotta be.
Katasu?
So, I mean, they've been there for a long, long time, people. So, like, ancient ancestors, they've been harvesting herring and halibut for tens of thousands of years. The bay lies on the ocean side of Swindle Island, so opposite of Klemtu Island, which is a village on British Columbia, the pine forested, like, remote inland passage. So when you look at this on a map, it's really crazy, because it's like, we've never been to the north coast of BC. I've been to Vancouver Island, but that's not the north coast.
No, I've never been past that either.
And it's crazy because it's like, this is on the ocean, but when you look at it in terms of like how far inland it is, because there's just these crazy canals and estuaries and like gnarly islands, and like you have to go through these crazy windy passages to get there. Like, it's
and you know what's
insane.
really cool about all of that is when I was studying geography, I actually learned about how BC was created. And because BC, how many thousands of years ago now? I can't remember off the top of my head. But essentially, BC is made up of what's called accreted terrains. And if you want to think about it, it's almost as if, you know, like plates, you know how subduction occurs when a plate slips below a different plate, like a tectonic plate. So essentially what was happening is there was a subduction zone that was gradually pushing an oceanic and a continental plate up against the Canadian shield. Oh, okay. And so that's how we created that's how the earth created the Rocky Mountains. And that's why we have so many mountainous ranges in BC, and how they're all in the same general, how would you even say it? Like, they're at the same general aspect. They all kind of like, it's almost like a crinkling of a tablecloth.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Really cool. And that's why we get so many of these sorts of like estuaries and like very lots of islands and everything in this area. It's really cool. But anyways, continue on.
I love that.
The more you know.
I know how much you love geography, so it's nice to pepper that in. And I guess that would be like,
I need to go and do like a refresh.
Yeah, totally.
I'm forgetting a lot. Yeah.
So, super remote place though, right? But we're still dealing with like crazy dense pine like coniferous forests, right? Coniferous forests.
Carnivorous. It's man-eating forest, man.
Damn, actually, if you could have a man-eating pine tree, that'd be gnarly. Just like those. Bring that into the
like those big spike trees. Fall into it, and that's
you swing down and spike you. But obviously, for you guys can probably guess, that's not a home to a lot of people. So Klemtu, across the way, is population of about 350 people. But it's been known to be a very reliable place for seeing Sasquatches, and it's actually been frequented by people like Les Stroud, and that's who. First of all, shout out to Matt Drew, because he sent us an article that I'm using for part of this, and then some stuff from Les Stroud, because he actually went there a couple of years ago in search of Sasquatches too. Oh. So that's Survivor Man for all of you guys out there.
I was like, that name's so familiar. What is it? Yeah, okay.
That guy who goes out in the crazy places by himself. Not like Bear Grylls, who has like a whole TV crew, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so they've been there for thousands of years. These human-like creatures have always been said to be living in the trees there.
Okay.
It was their ancient territory, and to the people living in this area, it still is to this day. So the belief in Sasquatch is essentially akin to a belief in black bears, especially for those who have actually like hunt them and go
It's
out in
just-
these remote places and actually end up seeing Sasquatches, which is a large portion of the people that live there.
That's really cool.
The
So
elders,
normalized, eh?
it's like, just imagine that for a second. Like, if that was so, it's just bizarre.
It's like walking out and maybe seeing a deer. Maybe you see one
Right.
one day, maybe you don't. And you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's a deer.
Exactly. And you just stay away from it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
The elders of the Kitasoo First Nations people tell stories passed down through oral tradition, and they speak about Sasquatch both in an allegorical setting, talking about, places you shouldn't go, and those types of stories, like when we talked about the bunyip and things like that, where they're more allegorical. They range from that to very literal experiences and encounters with their past elders and ancestors with these beings, and places where you physically just don't go. Like, there might as well just be a big no trespassing sign up there, because you're going to get a basketball-sized rock thrown at you if you go there.
Oh, that's always nice.
So this entire area we're talking about sits at the base of British Columbia's Great Bear Rainforest. So it's about 40,000 square mile expanse of essentially completely intact temperate woods, the largest one left in the entire world.
Whoa. 40,000 square miles.
Pretty crazy.
Oh, that's so neat. And that actually includes, like, the Great Bear Rainforest has the world's, besides polar bears, it's the world's only completely white bear.
Yeah, the spirit
bear. Yeah.
That's right, and they're super, super rare, and they're living amongst the Sasquatch. And probably just as rare as Sasquatch for these people. They probably see them almost equally. The terrain is not just dense with trees and mountains, but like deep fjords, love that word.
Fjords?
Yeah, it leaves space for whales and stellar sea lions, sea otters that can get crazy far inland. There's old growth forests, so giant red cedars, home to grizzly bears, black bears, the rare spirit bear, like you mentioned. It's just one of the most remote places in the world, and
Beautiful.
a perfect place for Sasquatches to hide
Sounds
and
like an
never be found.
amazing place to be.
Massive sections of this Great Bear Rainforest, too, are protected from any exploration, and this was because of a historic agreement between the First Nations people there and the BC government in 2016. So relatively recently, but just think about that, just in the sense that, like, even if people wanted to go looking for Sasquatch in certain places, they can't. It's literally a protected Sasquatch habitat.
So I guess this area doesn't have any pipelines going through it then, I would imagine.
No, it does not, and never will, by all accounts.
Hopefully.
Hopefully not. We would definitely do everything in our power to prevent that from happening, support the opposition of that in the Great Bear Rainforest. That would suck.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's some really cool stories associated with this place too, as you can imagine. So early summer 2001, this whole story is a mashup between an article sent to us by Matt Drew again and Les Stroud's experiences with this guy named Doug Neeslis, who was Canada's first licensed indigenous bear guide, and he's now the elected chief of the Kitasoo First Nations people. He's a counselor, stewardship director, resource stewardship director for the region, and all that kind of stuff. So he's out in the bush, and he's obviously familiar with the terrain, right? In this first story he told them, it was one of the most scariest experiences of his life. He said that he and 4 other companions were fishing in the bay, and they were camping on just a typical trip. And they basically set up camp, sat around the fire, having a typical conversations, but as things were the fire was kind of dying down and conversation was settling, he noticed something that's what seemed to be half of what was like a human-like face, partly hidden behind a large tree that was further up the beach.
Uh-oh.
And he kind of just started staring at it and just stopped talking, like didn't answer a question from someone, and the others turned and looked too to follow his gaze and tracked where he was looking and saw that he was fixed on something that he was just trying to understand. This was the first time he had seen a Sasquatch, I guess. And they all kind of caught a look of it. They looked toward the figure, so it at this point appeared to be crouching in the tree line, and locked eyes with them. And at that moment, the Sasquatch stood up, and this was his direct quote. He said, "It was huge, at least 7 feet tall. The footprints after the fact were about 15 inches long." And he remembers the creature slowly backed into the forest out of the firelight and, quote, disappeared. "I've had humpback whales come right up under my kayak, but this was the scariest moment of my life."
Ooh, that's spooky. Because you can't explain it. You don't know what you're looking at.
No.
And
It's the abject.
that is really interesting. So they had physical proof. Hey, they had the footprints.
I don't think they took any casts. Like, they didn't have plaster. But they did have footprints, and multiple people see them.
That's insane.
So the elders, though, like when you talk to the people there, the typical encounters in the stories that go way, way back, this is their description of it. So, like we've been talking about, obviously, tall, hairy creatures, but a few different characteristics, like long black fingernails. So I guess that would be a characteristic you'd expect, but we haven't really heard that in other
That's
stories.
a lot of detail. You'd imagine you'd be right up close. You'd be hand in hand.
Potentially,
like,
right?
How else would you see that?
Well, that's the thing about oral tradition that's not necessarily always written down. It's this, like, a memory. When was the memory? Was it a time in thousands and thousands of years ago when there really literally was people trading with these ancient beings, like handing stuff over, like literally that action? And then there's that memory of these long black fingernails, and thousands of years later, I don't know.
It's pretty nuts.
But yeah, the other thing is, like, dark eyes and obviously bipedal.
Okay, so that's pretty on.
Yeah,
on
usually
par.
seen standing on the beaches or peeking out from tree lines. There's another guy who lives in the community. His name's Vernon Brown, and he's the stewardship manager, resource stewardship manager. Works directly alongside Nislas. And his quote was, "The creatures are called pukwis or bagwis in their language. So words that also describe ape-like appearance. So they have, like, multiple meanings, I guess.
Pukwis or bugwis?
It reminds me of pukwudgie.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to
And
say,
also maybe like the K's and those kinds of sounds, like skookum. They're all kind of like, you can tell a little bit like what the meaning is after you look at a bunch of words like that associated with Bigfoot and Sasquatch. You know what I mean?
start to get familiar.
The elders, he goes on to say, elders warn against going to certain places that are, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, but called
Willaboo Quees.
something like that, which translates to where there are Sasquatches.
Okay.
Many people know the stories, even if they don't talk about them very much. They were seen more often when people would travel and harvest food or material resources, basically in their ancient past, right?
So when they're interacting with their environment.
Yeah. He goes on to say, even if people don't see them, they know Sasquatches are around by certain signs. One is the sound of tree knocks, which is something that we're familiar with, obviously. When Sasquatches want to protect their territory, so specifically when they're looking to get people away, right? They'll also throw rocks as warning when people are too close to their favorite clam or cockle beds. Another clue is their repulsive smell. I've smelled bears and they stink, Brown says. But around Sasquatches, I've smelled something horrible, pungent. It'll stop you in your tracks. And then all of a sudden, he snaps his fingers and it's just gone.
That is bizarre. And for me, a lot of people do make this connection. I'm going to make this connection right now with the whole odor. The foul odor, usually described as completely repulsive, obviously, but usually sulfuric. Usually, like farty, like that type of sound.
Basically.
Like, or skunky, the skunk ape, know, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that to me is a loose tie-in with other paranormal phenomena in the form of, say, like hauntings, like...
Yeah. Just weird, bad smells.
Yes.
I feel like that ties into when there's a portal involved, oftentimes. Plasma and goo and bad-smelling things.
And then as soon as it's gone, the smell has been sucked back into the portal.
Right. But I also don't want you guys listening to think that I'm not, like, going, like, cryptozoology. I do think Sasquatch is a creature.
I guess that should be our final debate, hey, whether or not.
It kind of will be, right?
Yeah.
But there's evidence for both.
Of course.
Right?
We should do a debate. I'll take one end, you take the other.
Yeah. Anyway, you can see that entire article that we pulled a lot of this from, and there's a few more quotes that go on, but these are the most interesting ones, but we'll have that up in our resources.
And there is similarities in Bellicula. So again, that is just a little bit further up the coast of BC. And in SasquatchCanada.com, or is it .org? I can't remember. They reference a very similar sounding creature, which is referred to as the Bok, and that's B-O-Q.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny. That kind of maybe loosely ties into the Bakwas. Hey, like Bogwis, like what we just mentioned up at the top there. With
and then there
Brown.
was the one from the Micmac. I feel like sounded similar to that.
Let's get a little bit on the Bok here.
Sure.
Okay, so there's a quote here from Sasquatch Canada. It says, Bucks are large, hairy, wild men of the forest. In the folklore of more northern tribes, such as those from the area of Bella Coola, BC, bucks are often portrayed as malevolent, dangerous monsters who may even eat people or molest women.
Okay.
But in Chinook or Salishan versions of these legends, bucks are sometimes depicted as more benign beings. Sometimes bucks are also called by the name skookum, which we're already really familiar with,
Yeah.
and is a word from the Chinook language meaning big, swift, or powerful. This is sometimes a source of confusion because skookum has been used in Chinook literature to refer to many different sorts of powerful beings, not just bucks. So
Right.
obviously, aka Sasquatch.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that connection
That's,
there.
yeah.
And that's just been the general trend, right? When you go into the indigenous lore and you go into the different databases that you can find online, at least, you do see just an amazing amount of different names to describe very similar phenomena. But then within that, you do get the differentiations between, say, something like this, where they're like, it's malevolent, it's gonna eat you, and then more benign, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
We even saw that with like fairies.
Definitely.
Like, you know, like indigenous forms of fairies and all that kind of stuff. But
Oh yeah, they can be nice, they can be nasty.
Yeah.
It just kind of depends.
yeah, it does.
And I feel like oh man, there's so many questions when it comes to this because we're dealing with such a long period of time. Like when you bring that up, it makes me think like, what's happened to the deteriorated relationship with these ancient beings between the existing indigenous peoples today, potentially, right? Is it because of when, like it wouldn't have been just from European contact, like things must have soured early or something, like, or I don't even know,
Just
like
diverged.
yeah. And now it's
Just so far gone.
so far gone, but we still get these places like Bella Coola and like other places on the north coast of BC where they're just so prevalent and it's still right there. It's still just right there. And there's a place that's even closer to us that we've mentioned before, Harrison Hot Springs, that has sightings every single year. And
Yeah,
if
we've
we're
been
gonna
to Harrison
if we're
quite a
gonna
bit.
get somewhere, we're gonna get there sooner rather than later to Harrison, and try to bring you guys some really cool content. There's Sasquatch Provincial Park at Harrison Hot Springs, which is really, really cool. I pulled out some information just like straight from their tourism website because it's actually really interesting because there's caves involved, and we love our caves. So basically, the home of the Harrison Sasquatch and other locations where there's some sightings are the Caves of Mystery that are on the west side of Harrison Lake. And local lore says that the Sasquatch hold a reunion there every 4 years, beginning on the night of the first full moon in July. So for 4 nights in succession, as the Sasquatch meet, there's apparently signal fires that were kept burning. And 1940 was the last time the fires were seen burning and actually reported. But then apparently there's been sightings in the area as recently as 2009.
What? So a resurgence.
That is really strange. I kind of skipped over a section there. I know you're maybe looking at me a little strange because it's essentially the same stuff we've been talking about. But because we've already mentioned Harrison with the story of Seraphine Long, and we're familiar with the area. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that I just thought that was so weird. This obviously the idea of creating fire.
Yeah.
So that's Orang Pendek territory, maybe Yaren territory, like at least knowing how to use it, maybe not necessarily make it. I mean,
Well,
we already
to scavenge it.
Right, exactly. I mean, we've got the people, we've got the
North Sentinelese.
yeah. They don't know how to make it, which is crazy.
Well, allegedly. We don't really know the state, but as far as we are aware,
There's no
they
evidence that-
harvest fire from like lightning
Lightning.
strikes and all that kind of stuff, and then keep it burning
Yeah.
in trees as long as they can, like
Right.
inside the hollow of a dead tree,
Yeah.
kind of essentially.
So setting signal fires implies you know how to make flint, basically. Like you know how to start fire
Yeah.
when you want to.
Or at least they're so powerful that it doesn't matter if they're using flint; they could just be smashing 2 rocks together, and
Right.
it'll eventually.
There's so many angles we can go with that in terms of speculation and talking about stuff. Like the idea that if you know how to make fire, the likelihood that you are a carnivore or
Right.
an omnivore that leans towards meat as your primary source of food.
Not that they actually cook it, supposedly,
Meat.
because they've been seen
Eating
devouring
raw
raw meat.
So that's sort of a weird potential crossover there. This is really interesting. I'm going to just open up the link here because I didn't want to copy paste the whole thing. But it's basically like warnings to follow when you're entering Sasquatch territory around Harrison Lake.
Okay.
And they take it super seriously. They kind of have a little bit of a joke at the beginning, but they're very serious, and they pepper in other stuff too because they want you to not leave out food for bears and stuff like that. But it goes on to say things like, if you're camping in Sasquatch territory, don't leave food or snacks out, as it will attract not only Sasquatches, but bears and cougars. You would want to avoid angering Sasquatch by playing loud country or folk music, because Sasquatches apparently like classic rock. That's their little joke. But then it goes on to basically say, like, if spotted in a distance, do not approach Sasquatch. Attach your telephoto lens, take a picture, then make a wide detour and leave the area immediately. If you're at a close range, do not approach a Sasquatch. Remain calm, keep the Sasquatch in view as you slowly get out your camera to take a picture, and then leave immediately.
They just are all about the camera.
Yeah, try to get a picture, right? Avoid direct eye contact.
So don't anger it with that,
Right?
because okay.
And then they go on to say, too, whatever you do, shoot only with your camera. Harming a Sasquatch or any other endangered species is a criminal offense under the Species at Risk Act. And even though the Sasquatch is not officially listed, it's unofficially listed.
Nice.
So I just thought that was an interesting thing to include, because they take it quite seriously. Because what if you do run into one?
Well, exactly, right? Yeah, and even, it's funny, because you could just play it off as like, oh no, that's just everything you would do if you saw a bear. But, aside from taking the picture, obviously, but...
It is everything you would do if you saw a bear.
It is.
Still.
But just to keep it interesting, I guess, maybe it could be a tongue-in-cheek where they just want people to pay attention.
True.
And
I think I think it's 50-50.
Yeah. But then at the same time, this area is very, very
Some of the most prominent
known.
Sasquatch researchers in the world have lived there and do live there still, and run like Sasquatch tours. You can go there and go on full like outback remote tours and stuff.
You can even go and explore some caves that have
Indeed.
been referred to as Sasquatch caves.
Sweet.
And yeah, it kind of ties into obviously all these old traditions of Sasquatch inhabiting the area. And these are known as Sasquatch caves. Why, Andrew?
Because Sasquatch were said to live in them at one point.
So there wasn't any actual physical proof in these caves.
Other than, actually, you know what? It's not included here, but I feel like there was some cave art at one point that's no longer there. Very much like the cave drawings at Christina Lake that used to be on the jumping rock, the rock where people would
petroglyphs,
jump
yeah.
off. They're not there anymore. You can't see them. But when I was a kid, they were there.
Right.
I think it's just local lore that they were the hiding place of Sasquatch.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of funny, though, because I do have another example of Sasquatches and caves.
Cool.
And this actually takes us outside of Windsor, Ontario. And we're kind of going back in time here. We're going to the 1950s.
All right.
And, okay, so this is really kind of bonkers. And brings up, again, J.W. Burns, that guy that was so famous. Well, not so famous, but famously credited with sort of bringing Sasquatch to the limelight.
Yeah.
For settler sort of populations. And so, essentially, he said that he received a letter. And it was a couple decades after the event. But essentially, this was from a self-described Ontario lawyer / notary public by the name of S.A. Wallace. And he relates how back in 1949, he discovered what appeared to be a cave containing the skeletons of over 40 Sasquatch.
Mass
Well,
grave.
let's just call them giant, hairy,
Humanoids.
I can't even say it, upright humanoids.
Crazy.
Yeah. And so I just thought this was really bonkers. Like 40 Sasquatch. And it's kind of vague, right? Because in the article, I believe it was a Vancouver Sun article. Either that or was another Canadian publication.
Okay.
And they just kind of described the account. So it didn't even come right from the horse's mouth. It didn't come from J.W. Burns. But I just thought it was fascinating. And so I was like trying to digging, and couldn't really come up with where these skeletons went, who this S.A. Wallace actually was. If he, like, I wish, honestly, we should just get like one of those ancestry.ca sort of things.
S.A. Wallace.
S.A. Wallace, a notary public in the Windsor, Ontario region. If anyone has ancestry.ca, just go look that up.
We know a
But-
few people we could ask.
Yeah. Anyways, I just thought that was very interesting and lends itself to the idea that Sasquatch treat their bodies with intent and care after
Right.
death, performing rituals, other ways of disposing of the dead. Again, this brings up a lot of parallels to even the Lost City of the Monkey God series we did, where it was like, these are revered places, places of the afterlife,
Right,
caves,
caves.
and the underground, and all this kind of stuff. So for me, I was just like, wow, that's a beautiful little tie in there.
Yeah. And even with goblins, we talked about caves as transition points and the ideas
Yes.
of
Exactly.
beyond spirituality.
It was really interesting too. There was a geologist that examined these skeletons and dated them approximately to be, well, very approximate. He dated them in the thousands of years range.
Okay.
Didn't actually say how many thousands.
So,
but they were described as very well preserved. So to the extent that they were referred to as being mummified.
So,
And-
1st century AD.
I don't know, sure. that works.
Okay.
But mummified, so I'm thinking, like, wait a second, is there hair fibers? Is there any, like, is it literally just the skeleton then? Like,
Right.
I'm picturing, like, Tutankhamun's tomb or whatever, but...
Do you say Tutankhamun?
Tutankhamun. No, I didn't say that. You're just putting words in my mouth.
I'm sorry.
You did that last time. You said that I said, what did you say that I said? It was...
The Royal Canadian Mountain Police.
I said the Royal Canadian Mounted. Apparently I have to say mounted in order for Andrew to get that
Well, just
in his head.
forest cops.
Forest cops, yeah. Okay, so yeah, sorry, getting back to the Vancouver Sun here. It was a 1957 Vancouver Sun article, so it was
Okay.
roughly a decade after, because this
Gotcha.
J.W. Burns supposedly discovered these skeletons in 1949.
Reported by J.W. Burns. S.A. Wallace.
Oh, sorry, yeah. It's S.A. J.W.
I know.
don't
Well, that's the thing. I was going to say, the S.A. Wallace and the whole, like, looking him up on Ancestry, that just reminds me of the Kincaid's Cave episode of Astonishing.
Where it's so vague.
Is it G.E. or J.E. Kincaid?
Yeah,
and it's like,
G.E. Kincaid.
anytime you see just the initials as the first name, it's like, man, that sounds made up.
I know.
S.A. Wallace.
I know. So for me, there is parts of this that don't really, I haven't been able to really tie them up as far as whether or not it's factual
tough,
or not.
right?
And it does sound like one of those classic, like, men's Pulp Fiction magazine stories.
Potentially.
Where it was like this crazy find
at
that
the same
somehow no museum seems to have a record
Well,
of.
they never want them. They never want to take it, even if they do have it. Smithsonian doesn't want to look at the Skookum cast. You know, oh, you found a Yeti hand. We don't even want to see it. Get out of town. Like,
I thought this was interesting, though. In the article from Vancouver Sun, they said, like, they had actually talked to some of J.W. Burns' neighbors, and they were questioning them
neighbors.
about his continued belief in Sasquatch. And to which they actually replied, oh, he might have believed back in the day, but I don't think so anymore. Was kind of one of his closer neighbors and stuff. And he was described as a school teacher, too.
he was.
Yeah.
He was a school teacher in the area of Mission, BC, and kind of in the interior there a little bit, and then moving up to the coast.
So they never actually got a sound bite in 1957. They never got a statement directly from Wallace. But it was kind of just a little expose article just featuring him.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what do you make of that?
I think that, well, I mean, if it's true, obviously that brings up a ton of interesting questions, because the whole argument, one of the main arguments against the existence of Sasquatch is the fact that we've never found a corpse, right? And even though we've said in other episodes with the bunyip, with any cryptid case, the things like the wood buffalo, or I always mix up if it's bison or buffalo.
The bison.
You know, existing for hundreds of years, never seen. These creatures weigh over 1,000 pounds, right? They were gone. We thought, no. So there's that.
Probably not. Yeah.
There's so, or like black bears. There's hunters that they go out they've been hunting their entire lives. They've never seen a deceased a bear ever. They've never once seen or any other large animal for that matter, like a moose just dead, right?
And
like,
it's almost insulting to think that you would just find a corpse,
yeah.
unless it happened to be really unfortunate circumstances where this creature died unexpectedly,
Like fell down
was
something,
by
or like-
itself,
yeah.
was unable to be located by its kin or its family or whatever community it's involved with.
Yes.
And that would be the only case for me where it would be like, that's an acceptable find. But even then, right, you would have to imagine, like, I'm thinking if I was one of these things, I would be on constant vigilance, constant lookout, constant survival mode, almost to the extent where you're almost living in A Quiet Place. You know what I mean? Like the movie A Quiet Place, where
that's what it would be.
you're just constantly trying to avoid the
Everything.
mess of human civilization.
Yeah.
And all
for
of
the
what
most part, though,
yeah.
until you let out a terrifying guttural scream, wailing thing that
Yes.
just sends people running down the beach because you're trying to get them away from your territory.
Exactly,
So you're
exactly.
okay with being known you're there, but at the same time, you don't want to be seen.
Exactly. It's almost like a top, like, Secret Service agent or something, like
Yeah.
living in the woods. James Bond.
Woods. That's the Sasquatches
Woods Bond.
are the ultimate forest James Bonds.
Yeah.
Forest cops.
Forrest Gump. Conan.
Forest
We're
cops.
just going to reference that all the time now.
I mean, yeah, that's...
Kind of wrapping it up here, hey?
We are sort of wrapping it up for this part 2.
This has been really
It
fun.
has been really fun. We found a bunch more stories that we didn't really expect to come across. And there's so many places that I just really want to go to now at this point, right? Like, we need to go to the
In our
north
own
coast of
neighborhood.
BC.
Yeah.
We got to go to Bella Coola. I mean, these are just beautiful places to visit in general if you're not interested in Sasquatch. But the idea of doing some wood knocking and getting a response
That'd be pretty epic.
would be pretty special, and we would love to bring that to you guys. So that would be really cool. We're saving
Yeah.
our shekels. So, any final thoughts? What are we getting into for part 3? I mean, obviously some conclusions, right? Like we
Yeah.
want, or if we can call them that. We have all the theories, and there's a bunch of them.
So many theories. And even just like there's larger meta themes to talk about. Like I
Yeah.
referenced, right? Like the idea of the changing face of Sasquatch in pop culture or in
Right.
or the public consciousness of this phenomenon, how it's changed over time. And then of course, the debate. Is this a cryptozoological phenomena? Is this paranormal? Is this interdimensional?
Is it an ancient
where are we going
human?
with this?
Is it an ancient ape? Is it?
Is it
What is it?
well, exactly. So we got a lot of fun stuff to,
got a lot to go through.
conclude with in part 3.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for listening to part 2, all y'all.
Thank you guys, and
And-
as always,
Yep.
shout out to our producer Charlene Ramler, our Patreon producer. Thank you so much, Charlene, and to all our Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much, and thank you everybody who listens to the show. We really appreciate you guys. We love y'all.
Yeah.
And let us know what you think of this part 2, what you think of the Patterson Gimlin film. So hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Into the Portal Podcast on all of those things, at Into the Portal 1 on Twitter.
Exactly.
Join our Facebook forum. Send us an email if you'd like that instead, into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. We love getting your emails.
And then as always, you can go visit coffeegator.com, use our promo code QUARK, spelled QUARK, and you'll get 15% off of your purchase.
Sweet deal.
Yeah, it was a sweet deal. I'm really enjoying our French press.
Oh, God.
I want to get more stuff from them.
Without Coffee Gator, the show would struggle. It would struggle.
It would.
So go check that out. And thanks again, guys.
Caffeine-fueled.
We will see you again very soon.
See you later on the Minje.
It's just on the Minje.